The bicycle you see on screen would soon become key evidence in a brutal crime in Ireland. Ashling Murphy had no idea that what seemed like an ordinary jog would turn out to be the final day of her life. She was repeatedly attacked with a sharp object and died from massive blood loss. To learn more about the case, we invite you to stay with us until the end of the video. In 2022, the quiet Irish town of Tullamore in County Offaly was home to a vibrant young woman named Ashling Murphy. At just 23 years old, she was intelligent, motivated, and deeply dedicated to building a meaningful life. From a young age, she had always dreamed of becoming a teacher, and that dream came true when she secured a position at Durrow National School shortly after graduating. Ashling immediately adapted to her new role, and colleagues noted how seamlessly she had become a part of the team, like she had always belonged there. Her father recalled how she was constantly on the go, always pushing herself to achieve more, and determined to make the most of each day. She inspired her students to challenge themselves too, never asking them to do something she wouldn't do herself. Her personal drive even led her to take on the challenge of learning the uilleann pipes, one of the most difficult traditional Irish instruments, to prove to herself that she could master anything with enough effort and commitment. Music had always been a central part of Ashling's life. She inherited her passion for the arts from her mother Kathleen and participated in numerous school groups, including the choir, orchestra, camogie team, and traditional music ensemble. However, it was the fiddle that remained her true love. She was recognized among the top 5% of fiddle players nationwide and had performed at the prestigious Tradfest Festival in Tullamore, a celebration of traditional Irish music. Despite her many talents, Ashling remained grounded and deeply devoted to her family. She always made time for dinner or outings with her father Ray, mother Kathleen, sister Amy, and brother Cathal. Her relationship with her boyfriend Ryan was equally strong. The two had met as teenagers at a disco when they were 15. Though they briefly went their separate ways, they stayed in touch and eventually rekindled their bond. From that moment forward, they were inseparable, dreaming together of building a home, getting married, and starting a family. Ryan often described her as someone with an infectious laugh and a comforting smile, someone who could lift your spirits no matter how low you felt. On the 10th of January, 2022, Ashling stopped by Ryan's family home to drop off groceries. Everyone there was isolating due to COVID, so she didn't go inside. Ryan later recalled how much he wanted to hug her, but they simply exchanged greetings at the door. They were both looking forward to a trip they had planned for 10 days later. 2 days after that brief doorstep visit, Ashling finished a typical day of teaching and, as part of her usual routine, decided to go for a jog. Whenever she had spare time, she would fit in exercise, and a run along the Grand Canal was something she often did to clear her head. Before leaving, she told her mother, Kathleen, where she was going. Concerned for her safety, Kathleen suggested she run somewhere else, but Ashling reassured her with a smile, hugged her goodbye, and left. Around 3:15 p.m., Ashling was jogging along Fiona's Way, a scenic and quiet canal-side path named after another missing woman, Fiona Pender. It was a common spot for joggers and dog walkers alike. At that same time, 2 other women were running nearby when they noticed a bicycle laying by the side of the path. They then heard crying coming from the wooded area beside the walkway and assumed someone had fallen from the bike and was hurt. As they approached to offer help, they saw a man crouched over a woman, pinning her to the ground. A necklace around the woman's neck bore the name Ashling. The man turned to the approaching joggers and snarled at them through gritted teeth, demanding they leave. The women could see the victim was still moving, twisting and turning in a desperate attempt to escape, but she was no longer making any noise. Neither of the 2 joggers had a phone with them, and no one else was nearby. They shouted that they would call the Gardaí and ran to the closest house they could find to get help. Authorities arrived soon after, but it was already too late. Ashling Murphy lay motionless at the scene. Her attacker had fled. Despite paramedics' best efforts, she was pronounced dead there. She suffered blunt force trauma to the neck and was repeatedly attacked with a sharp object. The cause of death was blood loss. Her keys were found close by, indicating she had tried to defend herself with them. Experts later confirmed that she had put up a fierce fight, resisting with every ounce of strength until the very end. The joggers provided as much detail as they could about the man they had seen. His jacket was particularly distinctive, a navy padded bomber jacket with unique stitching on the back. Near the site of the attack, a bicycle was found, believed to belong to the suspect. It was a Falcon Store mountain bike with straight handlebars and green on the frame. The Gardaí issued a very specific appeal to the public for information about this bike. During a press conference held shortly after, the Garda commissioner confirmed the bike had been seized and was considered a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation. Authorities wanted to know not only its whereabouts on the day of the murder, but also in the days leading up to it. They also appealed for any information about who might have owned the bike or whether it had been stolen recently. Several individuals who had been in the area at the time of the attack came forward to speak with investigators, though none of the early leads provided definitive answers. However, authorities were able to make use of Ashling's Fitbit data to reconstruct a more accurate timeline. Her recorded workout began at 2:51 p.m. About 30 minutes into the session, the device showed erratic movement patterns, and by 3:31 p.m., it stopped registering a heartbeat entirely. The Gardaí released a statement confirming that they believed the attack was committed by a single individual, and all indications suggested that the perpetrator had no prior connection to Ashling. Given the way she had fought back, especially using her keys as a weapon, investigators believed the killer might have sustained injuries, such as scratches, bruises, or cuts during the struggle. The description from the witnesses led detectives to focus on a man already known in the area for past violent offenses. Within hours of discovering Ashling's body, Gardaí arrested a 40-year-old man matching the given description. However, he was released soon after without being charged, as there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Because his name and photo had already circulated widely on social media, the man began receiving serious threats and had to be relocated to a safe accommodation, despite ultimately being proven innocent. More than a day had passed since the brutal murder of Ashling Murphy, a young woman who had simply been out for a jog along the banks of the Grand Canal, a location widely used for recreation and long considered safe. The town of Tullamore and the surrounding area remained gripped by shock and grief. Throughout the day, in every corner of the close-knit community, there was only one topic on people's minds: remembering Ashling. The tragedy hit especially hard among young women, many of whom were regular users of the same canal-side path. A sense of insecurity began to take hold. Parents who had once brought their children for walks now second-guessed their safety. The thought that someone could go for a routine jog and never return was deeply unsettling. As the community gathered to embrace the grieving Murphy family, memories of Ashling, as a beloved teacher, daughter, and friend, flooded the town. The atmosphere was one of disbelief, fear, and anger all at once. The incident was described by many as a woman's worst nightmare. There was a shared frustration that such violence could occur during daylight, in a public space, surrounded by people. Ashling had taken all the precautions one might expect, jogging in daylight, in a familiar area, and yet it wasn't enough. For many, it challenged the assumption that there are safe places. The tragedy underscored the harsh reality that women often feel the need to take extra measures just to move through public space without fear. Authorities vowed to do everything in their power to ensure justice. The Gardaí were receiving full support to pursue every lead. Detectives stated that all lines of inquiry remained open, including the possibility of robbery or a sexually motivated attack. As the investigation continued, so too did the mourning. An entire community left to process the loss of one of its most cherished members, and a renewed call for safety and accountability echoed through the nation. Ashling Murphy's case rapidly gained national and international attention. News outlets across Ireland and abroad covered it relentlessly, while social media was flooded with tributes, updates, and commentary. As is often the case with high-profile tragedies, many people rushed to share their opinions online. Unfortunately, a common theme emerged: focus on the fact that Ashling had been out jogging in a slightly secluded area. Activist Laura Bates responded emotionally to this pattern, arguing that such commentary represented a subtle form of victim blaming. She acknowledged that phrases like, "she was just out for a run" or "just walking home" came from grief and outrage, but emphasized that they carried an unintended implication that the horror of the crime might have been lessened if the victim had been doing something else. In her view, it didn't matter what Ashling had been doing. She had every right to be where she was without fear. As the investigation continued, candlelight vigils began to take place across the country. The scale of support was overwhelming. Thousands gathered to honor Ashling's memory, including high-ranking political figures and entire communities. The emotional response cut across all demographics, with many people, particularly women, feeling a deep sense of sorrow and fear. Ashling had become a symbol of something far greater than one single act of violence. At the Durrow National School, where Ashling had been teaching, the atmosphere was one of heartbreak and disbelief. Just the day before her death, she had been standing in front of her first-class students, full of energy and promise. Now, those same children arrived at school with tears in their eyes, their beloved teacher gone. Staff and families were shaken, struggling to comprehend how someone so vibrant and kind had been taken in such a senseless and brutal way. On the 14th of January, a solemn crowd began to form outside the Irish Parliament in Dublin. What started as a group of 100 people grew steadily throughout the afternoon. By 4 p.m., the number of attendees had swelled to 1,000 seats, Libervox by Leaves. Among them were some of the most prominent political figures in the country, including then Taoiseach Michael Martin and his likely successor, Leo Varadkar. Varadkar commented that the murder of Ashling Murphy had united the nation in both grief and collective outrage. It was clear this tragedy had touched every corner of Ireland. While the Gardaí were staying tight-lipped publicly, their investigation was accelerating behind the scenes. By the 17th of January, they announced that significant progress had been made, though few details were shared at that time. What the public didn't know was that police had received an alarming email the evening before. The message, sent at 10:44 p.m., began with a stark confession. "To whom it may concern, I am the person responsible for Ashling's murder. I am so sorry." Detectives moved swiftly, tracing the email back to its origin. The man behind the message was quickly located. He explained that he struggled with mental illness and often drank heavily, resulting in blackouts and memory lapses. He insisted, however, that while intoxicated, he may have written the message without understanding why. And in sobriety, he claimed to have no involvement in the crime. Though at first authorities thought they had found their suspect, further checks conclusively ruled him out. Just like that, they were back at square one, and hope seemed to slip away once again. But then, another lead emerged on that would ultimately break the case wide open. A man had arrived at a hospital located a considerable distance from the scene of the crime just 2 days after Ashling's murder. The 31-year-old sought treatment for numerous cuts, bruises, and scratches to his face. Due to how rapidly news of the murder had spread across the country, the hospital staff grew suspicious. Nurses alerted the Gardaí, suspecting a possible connection. When questioned, the man could not provide a credible explanation for his injuries, and he wasn't saying much at all. What was clear, however, was that his physical state told a troubling story. When detectives arrived at the hospital to speak with the 31-year-old man, their suspicions deepened. They ran a background check and quickly followed up with the search and seizure of 2 cars and 2 properties, one in Dublin over an hour away, and the other just 8 minutes from where Ashling had been killed. During his hospital interview, the man claimed that he had been attacked by someone wearing a blue face mask, an excuse that was difficult to verify given that mask wearing was still widespread due to the ongoing pandemic. He insisted the incident had happened too fast for him to remember clearly. The detectives, skeptical of his evasive answers, presented him with a photograph of Ashling. He denied recognizing her, claiming he had never seen her, not in person, nor in the news, and insisted that his lack of English would have prevented him from understanding media coverage anyway. Believing his story was incomplete, investigators chose to step back and give him time to reflect. When they returned, his version of events began to change once more. This time, he alleged that the man who had assaulted him was the same person who had attacked Ashling, and that he had only tried to help her, not hurt her. His story suddenly shifted, without any prompting, he confessed to being Ashling's killer. Despite being cautioned by detectives, he kept talking, crying as he described how he used a knife he carried for cutting chain to attack a woman he had never seen before. He claimed panic overtook him after she became frightened. He then pointed to 3 puncture wounds on his abdomen, believed to have been caused by Ashling's keys during her desperate struggle. He provided a DNA sample, which confirmed what detectives already suspected. The DNA found beneath Ashling's fingernails was a match to him. As investigators pieced together the events of that tragic afternoon, the public gathered to honor Ashling. On the 18th of January, hundreds attended her funeral, including then Dausiach Michael Martin, President Michael D. Higgins and his wife Sabina, and Minister for Justice Helen McEntee. Schools across the country held a minute of silence at 11 a.m. in her memory. Ashling's students stood solemnly outside their school, holding up drawings and photos in tribute to the teacher they adored, as the funeral procession moved past. Her partner Ryan, overwhelmed with grief, delivered a moving eulogy on behalf of both families, reflecting on the deep love they had shared over 5 years and the life they had envisioned together. The emotional weight of the day deepened further when Gardai confirmed a major development. The man under close observation in the hospital had now been officially arrested and charged with Ashling Murphy's murder. Authorities eventually identified the man behind the murder as Joseph Puška. A builder by trade, Puška had moved from Slovakia to Ireland in 2015 and was living in Tullamore with his wife and 5 children. That same evening, he appeared at the Tullamore District Court, and the area outside was swarmed with media personnel and members of the public. The town, already shaken by grief, was now transfixed on the man at the center of one of Ireland's most high-profile criminal cases. As the investigation deepened, Gardai uncovered more disturbing information about Puška's movements in the hours before he murdered Ashling. Anne-Marie Kelly had seen him earlier that day riding his bike. She had stepped aside to let him pass, but he rode past very slowly, staring at her in a menacing way that left her deeply unsettled. Later, she encountered him again at the canal, this time walking behind her while pushing his bike. Feeling his gaze on her, she quickened her pace. Fortunately, she spotted a man pulling up in a van and jogged toward him for safety. At that point, Puška quickly backed off and disappeared. It later emerged that Puška had also followed 3 other women that same day. His actions were caught on camera several times before he ultimately crossed paths with Ashling. Investigators concluded that his behavior indicated premeditation. He appeared to be hunting for a victim, someone to attack or kill. He was described as a phantom individual, someone who had never appeared on police radar before, and who had no prior convictions or history of violent behavior. Despite his earlier hospital confession, Puška later entered a plea of not guilty, claiming he had no memory of making any such admissions. He reverted to an earlier narrative, alleging once again that he had been trying to help Ashling, not harm her. As Puška remained in custody, the investigation continued. On the 13th of June, 2023, 5 other individuals were arrested in Dublin in connection with Ashling Murphy's case. That same day, they appeared before the Tullamore District Court. The charges brought against them were serious. Marek Puška, Lamir Kuška, and Lucia Rakova were accused of withholding information relevant to the investigation, while Josina Granova and Vera Gaziova were charged with impeding the arrest or prosecution of a suspect. These developments added a new layer to the case, suggesting that others may have knowingly helped conceal the crime or obstruct justice. By the time the trial began, the web surrounding Joseph Puška and the events of that tragic day had grown wider and darker than many had first imagined. On the 17th of October, 2023, the prosecution entered court with a powerful arsenal of evidence against Joseph Puška: CCTV footage, DNA matches, multiple eyewitness accounts, and, crucially, his own confession. Despite this, Puška's defense team continued to argue that he had been assaulted by another man, which explained his injuries, and that this same unidentified man had then gone on to murder Ashling Murphy. They claimed that the 2 female joggers had misunderstood what they saw, that Puška had in fact been trying to help Ashling and stop her bleeding, not attack her. To support their version of events, the defense called their final witness, Dr. Johan Grundling, a former NHS emergency and intensive care consultant. The jury had already heard that Pushka had confessed to Gardai, but the defendant claimed in his testimony that he had no recollection of making those admissions. Appearing via video link from the UK, Dr. Grundling stated that he had concerns about the validity of Pushka's engagement with the Gardai on the evening of the 14th of January, 2022. He cited several contributing factors that, in his view, could have impaired Pushka's mental state at the time, including his recent surgery, the administration of the opioid painkiller, oxycodone, an unfamiliar hospital environment, and potential language barriers. Dr. Grundling further suggested that Gardai should have consulted medical professionals before proceeding with any questioning, and that Pushka ought to have been screened for subtle symptoms of delirium or confusion. However, under cross-examination by prosecuting counsel Anne-Marie Lawler, the doctor admitted that Pushka had been routinely checked by hospital staff throughout his stay. There was no record indicating that he had been disoriented or confused at any point during his hospitalization. Furthermore, Dr. Grundling acknowledged that, based on the dosage given, Pushka would have had no more than just over 8 milligrams of oxycodone in his system when he made the confession. The prosecution swiftly dismantled the defense's arguments. They denounced Pushka's lies as foul and contemptible, and ridiculed the notion that he was playing the role of a good Samaritan. To suggest he had been helping Ashling rather than harming her, they said, was not only false but grotesquely offensive. The court was reminded in no uncertain terms that the only victim in this case was Ashling Murphy. On Wednesday, the 9th of November, 2023, following just 2 hours of jury deliberation, Joseph Pushka was unanimously found guilty of murder. The verdict came after 13 days of harrowing evidence and testimony from more than 60 witnesses. Pushka's version of events that an unknown man had attacked both him and Ashling before fleeing was soundly rejected by the jury. As the foreperson delivered the guilty verdict, Pushka remained silent, placing his hands over his face in apparent defeat. Judge Mr. Justice Tony Hunt delivered a scathing statement following the verdict. He told the jury that evil had undoubtedly been present in the courtroom, and there would, in time, be a reckoning for Pushka. He affirmed that he fully agreed with their decision and praised them for not wasting any more time than necessary on what he called nonsense. He made it clear that his criticism was not directed at Pushka's legal team, but rather at the weak material they were forced to work with. The judge described Ashling's murder in stark terms, calling it an act so vile it could make one physically ill. Given the disturbing nature of the trial, Justice Hunt took the unusual step of exempting the jury members from any future jury service for the next 20 years. As the jury exited the courtroom, the chamber erupted in applause. 1 week later, on Friday, the 17th of November, 2023, the sentencing hearing was held. Justice Hunt declared that only one sentence could be handed down under the law, a mandatory life sentence, which he described as richly deserved. During the hearing, Ashling's partner, Ryan, delivered a powerful victim impact statement directed at Pushka. He spoke of the unbearable grief of losing the woman he had planned to marry and build a future with. Ryan described the devastating emotional toll and condemned Pushka's lack of remorse, portraying him as the embodiment of cruelty and evil. Throughout the sentencing, Pushka refused to make eye contact with anyone who spoke, including the judge. Justice Hunt concluded the hearing by stating that if it were within his power to do so, he would have considered issuing a whole life order, a sentence with no possibility of release. He emphasized that anyone reviewing Pushka's case in the future must weigh heavily the fact that he had never shown any remorse, had offered no explanation for his actions, and had consistently lied throughout the investigation and trial. These factors, the judge insisted, should never be forgotten. Shortly after Joseph Pushka was sentenced, he was transferred to a padded cell in a different prison and placed under round-the-clock surveillance. Reports suggested that he had previously attempted to take his own life during the trial, and there were concerns for his safety as fellow inmates had openly threatened to target him while in custody. Despite his conviction, members of Pushka's family continued to maintain his innocence. Meanwhile, tributes poured in for Ashling Murphy and her grieving family. One official paid homage to her parents, Kathleen and Ray, her sister Amy, her brother Cathal, and her partner Ryan. Their courage, dignity, resilience, and strength throughout the harrowing ordeal were described as exemplary. He assured them that the Irish government would continue to support them moving forward, offering all necessary assistance during this painful chapter. On behalf of the Murphy family, a heartfelt statement was delivered. They expressed immense gratitude to their extended family, friends, and the broader community for their unwavering support since the day Ashling was stolen from them, the 12th of January, 2022. From the very beginning, the family had felt an overwhelming outpouring of love and solidarity from people not only across Ireland but around the world. Ashling, they said, had been not only an integral part of their family but also a radiant presence within the community, a community she gave back to year after year in every way she could. The Murphy family extended formal thanks to all members of Garda Síochána, who had worked tirelessly to conduct a robust and thorough investigation. They also offered their deep appreciation to the prosecution team, Justice Tony Hunt, their own family liaison officers, Sergeant Lucy Mullen and Detective Garda Alan Burke, as well as the court's victim support team, who had stood by them at every step. Finally, they gave a special thanks to the members of the jury, acknowledging the emotional toll of sitting through such distressing testimony and expressing their eternal gratitude for their strength and patience. The family concluded by stating the absolute importance of ensuring that this vicious monster could never again harm another woman. Ashling Murphy's tragic story is one that continues to resonate far beyond the quiet streets of Tullamore. It's a painful reminder that even the brightest lights can be extinguished in an instant, and that we must remain vigilant, not only for justice, but for change. If this story moved you, please help us honor Ashling's memory by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with others. We cover true crime stories with care, empathy, and respect for the victims. You can also check out our related content. We've linked other heartbreaking but important stories in the description and end screen. Together, we shine a light on stories that must never be forgotten.